People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Most of us are familiar with the way in which certain theatre performances grip, challenge and transform us. The ability of the arts to deeply move us also warrants a conversation around theatre as a mirror and driver of social change. I'm joined by two phenomenal theatre practitioners who both started theatre companies 25 years ago, showcased a plethora of creative works both locally and internationally and trilingually, both of whom use their work to shed light on social issues of social justice, rights and development. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio Ruwanthie de Chickera and Tracy Holsinger. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Ruwanthie, you are the artistic director of Stages Theatre Group. You have poured your life into theatre and filmmaking. Just to mention two of your productions, you notably wrote the script for Machang, which won Best Film at the Venice Film Festival. You most recently re-showcased Dear Children Sincerely, a deeply raw and moving piece about 7 decades of post-colonial Sri Lanka. You have also collaborated on the script of The Return, which is a retelling of the Odyssey, and the film will be in theatres this December. Also has a stellar cast. 25 years of work later, why do you continue to believe that theatre can shift public perspectives and discourse around social justice issues despite the grim reality that envelops us?
Well, Sonali, theatre by itself cannot, but theatre within a wider culture of acceptance and openness to creativity, critical thinking, empathy, all of that has a lot to offer, because these are the very foundations upon which theatre is built. An actor basically studies empathy their entire life. Their entire life is based on understanding how other people live. Every time you take on a role, you have to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So it's, I mean, from empathy to live performance, which is, you know, performances that connect the body and the mind and the spirit, to issues, you know, collective imagination. All of these things are very powerful things, and they are the primary foundations of theatre. That's the reason it has lasted so long. And that's why it needs to continue to be right at the heart of any society that is progressive, grounded, and which is growing.
Tracy, you birthed Mind Adventures Theatre Company, which just marked its 25th anniversary. Most recently, you directed Water for Kings, an original play written by Ramya Jirasinha to rave reviews. You've done a lot of work with experimental theatre and immersive theatre, and you too have held on to the belief that art can be a driver of social change. 25 years on, what have been some of your observations and aha moments to make you want to continue to do this difficult work?
I think one of my observations that kind of struck me very deeply and then made me sort of pursue that a lot was, you know, after the war ended in 2009, there was this word reconciliation being bandied about a bit, and we all wanted to be a part of this, didn't we? And so from 2009 onwards, I really engaged a lot with looking at our conflict. And through that, I started working with a lot of different people and traveling around the country and working a lot, especially with children in the north. And what I realized, I used to think for the longest time that everyone wanted reconciliation, that it was something that we all aspired to, because and maybe it was because I was in an echo chamber, you know, I just thought everyone must be aspiring towards this and everyone really wants this. And so I think what I the biggest thing I realized is that it's something that needs to be awakened. It wasn't necessarily everyone wanted to be together and to be one nation and to be more what we call now social cohesion, right? To make wrongs right. I just thought very naively that a lot of people wanted it. And then I realized actually it needs to be awakened and people need to understand why it is necessary. And I think that became then my drive, was like try and awaken that need or that want in people, or something more of an understanding of why there shouldn't be these huge, sort of very painful, hurtful divisions in our country. So I think that inspires me to keep going. I was also raised by an incredible woman, my grandmother, who from the time I was a child kind of instilled in me this idea that through theatre you have to be of service. And she was very specific that she wanted to us, like not just me, but my mother and my sisters, to be of service to the nation. So that's something that keeps me going. I mean, there have been times definitely along the way where I've just, I mean, you do despair, don't you? But when you're involved in it for 25 years and you sort of just see the effects of, whether it be nepotism or corruption or just plain repression, when you see the effects of that, you can't help but despair at times. But it's important to never give up hope. And there's this quote from James Baldwin, which inspired me a lot, which said, you can despair, but you can, I'm paraphrasing, but you can never give up hope, because you can't tell children that there is no hope. And so I think those things kind of form the cornerstones of why I keep going, why I keep doing what I do.
Ruwanthie, you and Tracy also share a deep friendship extending 25 years. You've collaborated with each other on numerous projects. You've traveled internationally with projects. Speak to us about the collective journey, discovery, realizations that you've had. I'd like an answer from both of you.
I'm going to go back about 20 years to something that Tracy told me when I was in one of my low points. She said, Ru, the women friends that you collect around you, they will become your family. And that really has been my experience. And I'm referring to it because Tracy, I consider her, you know, my soul sister. We have had incredibly sort of parallel journeys, not just professionally, personally as well. And we've grown together. We've stayed friends, we've critiqued each other, we've worked with each other. And I think that's quite special. I think even in the arts industry, to have such a kind of a growth with somebody that you admire so profoundly. I honestly believe that she's one of the best directors we have in this country. She's phenomenal. She has directed me. She directed me when I was, I think, about 20.
She's directed me.
About 24 years old. I from that moment, I thought she was just so incredible, not just only in terms of her knowledge, but also her capacity to understand what kind of motivation or intervention each actor needs, and to journey with them. So I have a huge amount of respect for her and her growing work. And I really wish that upon, well, artists, I mean, I wish that upon everybody, but I wish it upon artists in particular, because this journey can become very lonely. It does frequently become very lonely. And it is really all the difference when there is somebody that you've grown up with and that you've grown older with, who shares your passions, who shares your fears, who shares your vision.
Your insanity.
Yeah, your insanity, you know, your secrets, things like that. I mean, it's a really powerful thing. And there's, I mean, a lot of my career, I can attribute to this incredible woman next to me who's supported and advised.
My gosh.
And collaborated.
Just blushing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say the same. I mean, I think the most exciting thing is that we learn so much from each other. Like Ruwanthie was the first to stage a forum theatre show in this country. And we all sort of piled in going, oh, what are we doing? And it was just so fun learning together. And then, you know, we've done the same thing, like whether it's immersive or a physical thing or whatever. We've learned kind of forms from each other, which is great. And, you know, she's an amazing writer. I keep sort of saying more of her work should be published. But yeah, I mean, I am echoing a lot of what she's saying. I think we owe a lot of our achievements to each other. We've grown together, and it is having a soul sister, someone like family who you just know what they're thinking. And I think, yeah, we're different as well, which is nice. Otherwise it would be, you know, just too much.
Not so interesting also.
Not so interesting. You know, we've had fights, we do all that. But I think that's also part of being family as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Tracy, a phenomenon that traps most of society into submission is shame, whether it be shame surrounding one's body, one's sexual orientation, one's socioeconomic background. And largely, traditional education has failed to help us understand and cope. How can theatre come in to help us better comprehend the beauty that surrounds us, the beauty that is us?
Yeah. I think about that often, you know, because here we are at this very amazing moment in time for Sri Lanka. And this thing, for instance, about class, it was a huge issue as we came towards election. And poverty and the shame surrounding that. And shame in general, well, I mean, in one sense, it's a way of controlling people, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, so how does theatre help you break out of that? And again, I'll go back to something Ruwanthie said. I think it's about having empathy and then creating instances where you can, for instance, through forum theatre, elicit people's opinions and thoughts and also teach them at the same time and have huge social discourse around all these topics. I have a forum show, for instance, that deals with online exploitation, sexual exploitation, which is a huge issue here, especially among teenagers. And so we have this forum piece that has been staged many times now since 2018. And it's one way of engaging with young people and saying, this has happened, and allowing them to talk back to us, to have a conversation with each other, to talk to our actors, and then to tell our actors, try out this scene, try out that scene. And through that also, everyone, whether it's adults or children, everyone goes away knowing a little bit more. Or, I won't say, I mean, if you are very idealistic, when you're in university, you're taught that the right play, the right kind of theatre can change minds and change lives. And as I know, as we've gone along the way, you've kind of had to hold on to that idea very strongly. And then what you do realize that it does change lives and it does help people. Every time we do this particular show, which is about sort of teenage sexual exploitation, we have a therapist now who is with us every time we do the show, because there are so many people who come back after the show is finished and talk to us, share their stories with us, and often need help. So I think one way is to just normalize talking about all these things, talking about things that we say are taboo because it's not part of our culture. But really, culture is not something stagnant. It needs to constantly evolve and change. And I think the more we do things like that, and the more we normalize talking about this thing, it does take away the shame. For instance, taking away the shame of, say a young girl is exploited and there's, sensitive pictures of her on the internet. One amazing piece of advice I got from a colleague of ours, Hans Billy Moria, who's done a lot of work in this particular field, he just said, you have to normalize people accepting their bodies and normalize nudity. Why is it such a dirty, shameful thing? This term, culture, it's compromised. And it's like, oh, well, if you don't conform to this, then you're naughty. Shame, shame. I mean, we like doing that.
In my experience, working in the theatre, I feel just putting young people on stage, making them aware of their bodies, aware that their bodies occupy a particular shape and space in the overall environment. Just that sort of body awareness, making them aware of other people's bodies, the shape, the energy, the capacity of bodies. That's a deeply learning experience for any young person. And I would even contend that after lockdown, and particularly with this generation who spends so much of their time in virtual reality on their phones, there has been a great disassociation between young people and their bodies, a lack of kind of awareness, or maybe they return to their bodies only for particular things like sexualization or dressing up or things like that. But as a director, and I think Tracy possibly has experienced the same thing working with younger and younger people, I pay a lot of attention now to getting young people to really get into their bodies, to understand this physical sort of mass, and to be present in it, because there is a disconnect, a growing disconnect. And I think when you're on that kind of journey as a young person, you automatically begin to shed all of this other baggage, that is connected with shame, because you're aware of your own body. You have to interact with other bodies on stage. You have to build trust amongst your actors. Otherwise that comes and hits you back in the face, like nobody wants to act with you. So most young people who work in the theatre actually deal with these issues of shame very quickly, really, and get over it. So I think it's a fantastic vehicle to get people to overcome things like this.
Ruwanthie, now what you just said, what you and Tracy just said, this needs to go to the children in the villages, not just the children in Colombo and Kandy. How can we enable the dissemination of these kinds of types of conversations, understanding our bodies, accepting and acknowledging the space our bodies take, ridding ourselves of the shame that sort of trap us into quiet submission. How do we take these conversations to the villagers? How can we see this reflected in our school syllabi?
I think that's the whole point there. It is it has to go to, if you're talking about rolling this out to a generation of children, it has to be in the education system. And I mean, all of us are products of the education system of Sri Lanka, and we've turned out reasonably okay. But that is not because of the education system.
No,
it is
it
in
certainly
spite
isn't.
of it.
Yeah.
In spite, yeah.
It is in spite of it. And I think that's, I mean, anybody who has been through this system will say that. So why do we keep continuing with this? I mean, I go back to a comment I once heard from somebody at a conference. He was from Bangladesh. And one thing he told me is our sort of rote learning education systems are mechanisms to create a generation of non-thinking people, right? It's not even something that people resort to or governments resort to because they have no other option. It actually is a first choice because these kinds of people are easy to control. They're easy to sort of mobilize for, you know, on issues of racism and things like that. If you're non-thinking, if you don't ask questions, if you're always told to shut up and sit down and listen and the teacher is right and don't ask questions, because if you ask questions, you're stupid.
Yeah, questioning is tantamount to either being stupid or to challenging the teacher's authority, right? A teacher doesn't like a question is a bad thing. Like you're sort of like I said, challenging a teacher's authority. That is what questioning is perceived as. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No,
you.
It's right. So I mean, both of us are teachers, and one of the first things I tell any student is you have to question me. And if you do not understand what I have just said, it's not your fault. It's my fault because I'm the teacher. Then I have to find a way to explain it to you so that you understand it better. But I mean, basically, it's rolling out of anything that is going to be useful to our society and our next, coming generations has to go through the education system. Yes. And on that point, I'd like to sort of say something that I've been mulling on, for a long time. Our education system came out. It was created because there were some needs in society, right? We all know it was created during the industrial age, right? There was a need to produce a lot of people to work in, growing organizations, in industries, etc. There was a lack of access to information, so information became standardized and rolled out to everybody, the same kind of information, right? So the need was that information was not available and everybody didn't have it. And if a lot of people had it, they could get the same kinds of jobs because that was what society required. However, those are not the needs of society anymore because information is available to everybody. All children have access to any amount, of information that they need. There's not a whole lot of jobs out there for people. In fact, there will be less and less jobs as we move forward into the future. We will be, humans are going to be vying for jobs with machines that are going to be doing our jobs much faster than us. So then what is the need of society, right? And schools need to stop and work out if they really are preparing children for this, the type of society that is being created around us, even as we speak, and B, are schools meeting the needs that society does not provide? And my main contention with this is right now, what society is not providing children is they're not providing them with community. Right? Society doesn't really, because it's increasingly isolated. It's an isolated life our young people are living, right? There's a lack of purpose and hope. There's a lack of, we were talking about this before, like bodily awareness. So schools really should be moving into providing those kinds of things for our children.
Whereas they're not. I find that a lot of schools are actually regressing.
Absolutely.
And to add to your point, actually, so yeah, this education system we're looking at is 200 years old, Industrial Revolution, right? And it was created to create a greater sense of equity. This thing about shame you're talking about. So education came in, and education in this particular format was to create a greater sense of equity between all classes of people. But society, contemporary society, has moved on. And these ideas, especially in our country, these ideas of virtue and what is good and what is normal. I mean, let's say people my generation, I was born in the 70s, and before that, you know, we're all probably neurodivergent in ways that we've realized now, which were not acknowledged at the time. If you think of someone being on the autism spectrum, for instance, how that was considered, say, 20, 30 years ago to what we know now, there's such a huge change. And what we know now, that to be divergent is more normal than it is to be, I mean, whatever this, you know, thing of normal is, to fit in, to kind of fit into this box, go on this, you know, it's all, the way we function and the way society functions has changed. So our education system needs to keep up with that and adapt to how humanity is moving forward, because it is still very Victorian. And along with that come these notions of what is good, what is right, what is correct, what is respectful, what is virtue. And they're all so outdated, and particularly in our country, just such a blaring example of our post-colonial hang-up that I just wonder, like, when are we going to get over it seriously?
Yeah.
Because it is getting in the way of us moving forward.
Absolutely. We are in conversation with Tracy Holsinger and Ruwanthie de Chickera. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
Platform.
Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Ruwanthie de Chickera and Tracy Holsinger. Ruwanthie, we saw the showcasing of Dear Children Sincerely just before the elections. I'd like you, Tracy, to give us an excerpt from the character you gave life to. And Ruwanthie, I'd like you to preface it.
So, Dear Children Sincerely is a project we started in 2015 when there was, as you know, because of political events in the country, we felt there was an opening up of democratic space. So there was a willingness to look back at our past and honestly understand the mistakes that we made. So as a theatre company, what we did is we started interviewing the generation born in the 1930s, because what we felt is that they would have living memories of independence and all of what followed, and they would be in their 70s, 80s, some of them in their 90s, and we wanted them to look back on their lives as Sri Lankans and tell us what this journey was like, because they grew up in parallel lines to post-colonial Sri Lanka. So what did it feel like to be a young person who inherited this country? And then what did it feel from decade to decade to move through sort of increasingly bad decisions, political decisions, which then heralded crises after crises. And then at the end of their lives, what do they now feel, looking back on all of this? So it was a huge research project that we started. We interviewed over 70 people of that generation in Sri Lanka. And we created little performance pieces out of this. The production that you're referring to is called Dear Children Sincerely, 7 Decades of Sri Lanka. And it takes the audience through 7 decades in 7 scenes, each scene depicting a turning point of that decade. So independence, Sinhala only, the JVP insurrections, 83, it goes on, right up to the end of the Civil War, and particularly how it ended in 2009. So Tracy came on board as one of our, initially collaborated with me in with the actor training and the directing of the play. Then subsequently moved on to perform in it. She's done different roles, but this particular piece that you've asked her to perform is one that she did in our most recent show, and it is the final decade and the final scene in the play. It's the decade around in 2000, and it deals specifically with the experience of the end of the Civil War and ending up in the infamous Manic Farm.
I have to say I'm not going to perform it because I think I play someone about almost 40 years older than myself. But I will speak it. It's very beautiful. And it's actually based on something by a Tamil lady doctor who was in Manic Farm.
Yeah.
And I'll just speak a certain portion of it, a portion that I think, for me anyway, I found it sometimes very difficult to say these particular lines. So this is after she has been taken to Manic Farm, and she's been there a few days. And she says, "I watched the young faces around me grow old and ashen and strange. It must have been the constant wind that whipped the dust up into their hair, into their eyes. Oh, there was dust everywhere, on everything, on clothes, on bodies, on eyelashes, on hopes, on promises, on children, on ice cream. I forgot to tell you, the ice cream vans came in, followed by the super banks and the super brands. Supermarkets in a refugee camp. It must be the age of my eyes, because I just don't understand that. And it looked a little vulgar, although their employees dressed very nicely for us, I suspect. But I had more pressing needs than ice cream. You see, there was nowhere to. There were no toilets, only pits, or one had to find a tree. I stopped eating. I couldn't bear the shame of it. And then, dear God, help me, the horror of this is more than I can bear. There were little children that fell into those pits. Little children, babies, toddlers, that drowned in that filth. Little children choking and dying in our filth. Our filth, God help me.
Ruwanthie, you wrote this and you staged it around Sri Lanka?
Well, not yet. I would like to.
In Colombo and suburbs? Yes.
No, only in Colombo. Yeah, we've taken it to Kalania, but we haven't been able to secure the support to take it out to the regions. I would really love to, but no, it's a big production because its scope is big. We're trying to, it's a big show, but it hasn't been seen enough, I believe.
Funding and sponsorship, investing in the arts. This is a constant problem that both of you and others along with you face. Why are the arts sort of deprioritized?
I don't think the arts, all of the arts, is treated in this manner. I think that there's sort of three kinds of functions arts sort of provides. The first one is entertainment, and that is reasonably well sort of franchised. People support that. And so it's a place where you go and you forget, and that's an important thing. You go, you forget, you relax, you know.
It's a bit of escapism.
Yeah, it's escapism. Mm-hmm. So a lot of art falls into that category of entertainment, and that receives the most amount of support because that is the easiest thing. There's another chunk, which is the kind of art that sort of provides healing, right? So that would be sort of community projects where you go and you distribute sort of music instruments amongst, you know, underprivileged children, or, you know, people go up and they paint hospital walls and they give libraries, you know, things like that. That also gets a fair amount of support because that comes from, you know, us being a Buddhist society. That's a sure bet way to, you know, a better life in, you know, in the next birth. The kind of art that Tracy and I engage in, and this is what is least supported. It is also what needs it really needs to be recognized as something really important, is what I would call the critical arts. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of art that questions, it makes you think, it pushes boundaries, right? It takes risks. So it's not art that people can sort of just relax with and feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
But it's really important art that pushes societies forward. And it's like science, you know, governments and, you know, private sector, they invest in science because they believe that it expands our minds, it expands our lives, it pushes us forward. Arts does the same thing, but it does not receive that kind of support. In certain countries it does, and you can see how those countries have sort of progressed. Absolutely. Because their artists are recognized and right at the forefront of nation building. Mm-hmm. Because artists contribute directly to building the imagination of a country, right? And as long as our governments, our private sector, our parents do not recognize the importance of the critical arts, it'll continue to just occupy the peripheries and the margins of society and will not be the kind of driving force which will push this country into its capacity.
Mm-hmm. That's because it's something quite intangible. You invest in science, you see an experiment, you see a physical result. With the arts, the result is quite intangible. Mm. It's something that feeds our soul. When you're depressed, or when you're feeling down, or when you need to be cheered up, what do? You watch a film, you listen to music of certain kind of, you might wander through an art gallery, or whatever it is, it fills your soul. There isn't a tangible,
it's not quantifiable
result. Mm-hmm. And so people tend to think, oh well, it's not that important, and also, oh, anyone can do it. And that's true, anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. And it does, it is a conduit for expression.
Yeah.
And especially if, you know, you're in quite a controlled environment, you do need that. You need that release, whether it's watching a TikTok or this or that, you know. These are all artists who are making these things for you. And what would you do if you didn't have machang to go and have a good laugh at, you know, for instance? So I think that's one thing, is that, you know, and especially after the pandemic and how our professions suffered, it has made people more cautious, for sure. But, Ruwanthie is absolutely right. In nation building and capturing the imagination of a people, and we saw it happen so clearly during the Aragalaya, commentary, social commentary, which is what we do, provoking people. Our jobs are not to provide answers, they're to ask questions. And questions are uncomfortable and difficult, and you don't want to think about them all the time. So there's that aspect to it as well. But equally, there are people who want to ask questions and who do think it's important. It's just, there should be more of them, really.
Tracy and Ruwanthie, Sri Lanka has a new government. Sri Lanka also requires a national strategy that outlines the manner in which the government will prioritize its support for the creative arts. This requires infrastructure, investment, prioritization of the arts, nurturing talent, creating a conducive environment for artists to thrive and for the nation to thrive. So you spoke about the transformative power of the arts. Speak to us about how this can be translated into action, how this can be translated into budgetary allocations for the arts.
I mean, just make it a weekly subject. It happens right now in some government schools and in some private schools. It's just part of your weekly curriculum. So you have music, you have art, you have dance, you have drama. It's scheduled into your weekly timetable. It just becomes a part of what you're doing. And I think people are recognizing more and more. There's more and more students now doing the local and international O-level and A-level exams, not just in theatre, in music, in art, all of it. I think there is a growing understanding of how vital it is. And I just hope, as you said, this new government does see that, and that they do have some sort of strategy to make it a part of our curriculum. It should be as normal as, we have, even when I was in school, we had once a week, we had an hour of Kandyan dancing. And that was considered vital to our education because it was part of our culture. But then so much of theatre and drama and art, if you think about our heritage and our history, it's full of incredible artistic achievements. And those have to be carried forward. They must be sustained. If you think about one of the most precious arts we have, Dumbara weaving, is there's only one family in one village in this whole country that does it. Whereas it is one of our oldest traditions and should be protected and preserved.
Ruwanthie, how can the arts be amplified through governmental action and policy?
I'm very happy to say that I do believe that this government already has been paying attention to cultural policy. When the President Mr. Dissanayake, just before his election, I attended a cultural policy sort of meeting where it was the cultural policy was shared with the general public. So that was a fantastic start. It was one of his strategies in the run-up to the presidential election, which was wonderfully comforting and inspiring. However, there are definitely steps that can be taken. One is access and infrastructure.
Yeah.
I do believe that one of our past presidents, Chandrika Kumaratunga, had an idea that people should have access to halls and theatres all over the country, and she did actually start that. Where little halls were created all over the country, but these haven't been developed. Now they've basically turned into tutories, right? They're not places that take arts to children. They're places that tuition classes are conducted in, because they haven't been developed. So there has to be a shift to recognize access to art as a right and not a privilege. It shouldn't be tied up with how much money you have or which town you happen to grow up in and live in. High quality art should be made accessible to all our people all over the country, just like any high quality other service. So it shouldn't be that the best plays only get produced in Colombo, or even when these plays get taken out into the regions, they're a kind of a watered down version of it is taken, because there's no lights, there's no blackouts, there's no infrastructure. So things like, there's a basic infrastructural challenge. And then of course education, as Tracy said, it needs to come in from education itself. Finally, there's a deep mindset shift that needs to occur amongst parents, and that maybe that could be encouraged with job opportunities for young people.
Yeah.
A lot of my actors actually had to leave home when they told their parents that they wanted to be actors, because it's so frowned upon, not because it's feared, because there is no economic stability in it. So that kind of thing can really those steps, simple steps like that, can really help.
Infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason that so many, not just actors, but artists, people who, your wig maker, your makeup artist, your lighting person, all of us are in a sort of vulnerable position, because there is no infrastructure for our industry, because it may behoove some people to keep us amateur, because that means you don't have to pay anyone, right? But it does put a lot of our young artists, and not just young artists, but even older artists, it does make us vulnerable, and it does make life that much harder.
I'd like to add to this another thing I've noticed in our industry, in the arts industries. We have a lot of artists in their 20s, and they're just after school, where they have a short window of time where they're not married, they don't have children, they have a little bit of freedom. So there's a lot of them. There's lesser of them when they hit the 30s, even lesser when they hit the 40s, 50s, forget. It just keeps dwindling. So we're missing that maturing artist, right? And a nation has a lot to gain from an artist who grows in vision, in insight, in maturity, right? If our artists are only in their 20s and 30s, that's a handicap. We need the energy of young artists, but we also need the maturity and the insight and the wisdom of older artists. So we need all of this in order, again, to, as I said before, to really create the kind of imaginative sort of color and journey for our people.
Very quickly, my last question. We spoke about empathy. Tracy, theatre enables us to see beyond our worldview. We are compelled to see the world from the eyes of someone else who's different to us. And we emote with the character. We feel another's pain, suffering, strife. In real life, we are oftentimes guilty of othering those who are different to us. And that has been Sri Lanka's history by and large, thriving on othering.
It is our biggest tragedy, isn't it? And I often think about it in terms of, we are so proud of being a biodiversity hotspot in terms of our flora and fauna. We're so proud of it and we celebrate it. Why can't we do the same with our people? Why can't we acknowledge that Sri Lanka has been a melting pot of cultures for centuries upon centuries, and that should be celebrated? And do we not see, I mean, especially from what is happening in Palestine right now, that this concept of saying there is a majority people, these are better people, these are the right people, this is ours, and can we not just see how harmful and destructive that is?
Tracy, does theatre have a role in inspiring empathy and building a more equitable and inclusive future, or is that asking for too much?
I hate preachy theatre. Theatre's plays with a moral or a message, because very often the people who are talking about morals and messages, they don't mean it. Theatre, if we're saying it's a mirror, right? That's what we're taught. Theatre is a mirror that reflects life. Life is messy and difficult, and theatre can't solve all those problems. It's not meant to. It's meant to show people and share different versions or share different people's stories, and share those stories with people so that people will respond. People will think about how they're going to react to how they are reacting to something. Maybe it'll change the way they do something. That's the most we can hope for. We are here to ask questions, not to provide answers.
Speak to us about the magic that is theatre, that is filmmaking, that is the arts.
The magic, there's two kinds of magic that I've experienced. There is definitely the magic of being on stage, and it's just so incredible. It's such a kick, it's such a high, and anybody who's been on stage will tell you that. It's absolutely addictive, because you're literally in the spotlight, and not in a studio like this, just the three of us, but the recipient of the energies and the attention of 500, 1,000 people, all of them who are there looking at you, right? That's a pretty insanely euphoric moment. So that's easy to identify that magic, and I think that's what draws a lot of people to the theatre, to live performance. The other kind of magic is a more subtle thing, and I think that is in the creative process. It's when you're stuck in that room for 8, 9, 10 hours working on something, and you just, you keep hitting wall after wall after wall, right? And you're just, your actors are trying, you are trying, the words on the script look okay, but it's just not coming together. And your actors are looking at you because you're the captain of the ship, and you need to be able to provide them with a journey forward, and you're just not getting the ideas. And if you have the faith to hang on, not cave, and believe that that moment will come to you, it does. It really does. And that is magic.
When it does.
It's just magic. It's when things just fall into place. And I think a lot of substandard work actually comes about because people are not willing to hold out for that moment where everything makes sense. What you're saying fits with how you're saying it and who you're saying it to, and something is created that fits that time and space and place so perfectly that it is the only story that could have been told by that group of people at that time. And that's really magic.
There has to be a willingness, to say, I don't know, and to be afraid.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to be willing to go there.
You'll never push yourself into that next step, that boundary, if you're not willing to be really afraid of absolute failure.
Yeah.
And it's only the artists who take those risks that will experience that magic or that failure, and it could be either, but also through the failure or whatever, you ultimately are able to expand your audience's minds and take them to areas that they have not thought of before. And that is what an artist does. They take people to places that they could not conceive of possible.
All right. Thank you both for this fabulous conversation.
Pleasure, Sonali. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
And
having
it
us.
was so lovely to have the two of you together.
It was really lovely for us, the two of us, to be
Yeah.
together on a show. So thank you
Yeah.
for giving us that opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next Friday. Good night.